So when you've personally had the experience of doing the remote viewing or astral traveling, did you get a new sense of what it's like on other dimensions?
Um, I think my left brain gets in the way, and so I'm not very good at it. Um, so when I had my best experience was a remote viewing target. I think it was the sinking of the Titanic. Okay, and of course in all remote viewing, as you know, you're never told what the target is. You get given some numbers, and you have a procedure, and then you do your best to come up with information. And but I was there, I was there, and as I saw the ship, I saw it going down, and I realized it was the Titanic, and I was in the water. I was like a 12-year-old girl. I was in the water, and I was being pulled up by somebody into a lifeboat in my consciousness. Um, so that was my session. But then I think after the session, um, I was out of body, and I didn't really realize it because I didn't know that much about it. I didn't know what it would feel like, and I felt very disoriented and fuzzy. And I went and lay down in my bed for a while, and it was like I had these very vivid cartoon-like images of beings that were coming to visit me and interact with me, and they seemed so vivid, like they had their own consciousness. Tony Robbins was one of them, but there could have been like a cartoon character that showed up as well. I don't know. And what was striking was that I wasn't trying to make up any of this. I was just trying to relax, and they seemed alive. And what somebody suggested afterwards to me was probably I was out of body, and that these were other beings that were interacting with me, but my consciousness had to turn them into something that I could relate to. Um, so that's my suspicion. Uh, with the Monroe Institute, I had one session where I was in a particular place in my mind, and another person in our group described something that looked similar in his session, so that I'm kind of thinking we were probably in the same place, which was not on Earth. It was in off in space somewhere. So there were like a few little things like that, but I've never really been able to go out of body in any kind of controlled way and look back at my body and look at things in the room and things like that. I would like to be able to do that, but I haven't worked very hard at it. So.
What interested me about Monroe is that he time traveled to the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if he went to the past, and then he found that we have different manifestations of our spirit, and he went to do you remember this story? He visited a Robert Monroe in another dimension where the physics were different, and he went into that guy's body and disoriented him, and he thought, oh, I'll never do that again. But it really makes all our sense of time and space seem really archaic when you read his books.
Which book was that? Do you remember?
I've read his three, so I don't remember which one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've got them all, and I probably should go back because I I read the first one more carefully and the second and third more rapidly. So I probably should go back and look at that. I was watching a talk by Joe McMoneagle yesterday on video, where he describes this remote viewing software that they've developed where you can practice with it, and they give you a target, some numbers, and you're doing this session, and etc. And you're given six, at the end, you're given six scenes. And you have to judge which one is most like where you just were. Except, and people often do very well, they often do very well at this thing, but there's a random number generator inside the software they don't tell you about, and they don't actually decide which target it's going to be until the last instant when you push the button. So it's like, again, there's this whole time thing that where was it until then? Um, so I think, and he doesn't believe in time, and I think that's right. We have to have this whole idea of a multiverse where there's many dimensions of time simultaneously has to be more like how things really are. So I'm still working on that myself consciously. I haven't quite, but I know it's more complicated than our present science. So.
Oh yeah, the Stargate remote viewers routinely drew targets before they'd even been selected by the computer or whatever.
Exactly, exactly, and that's what I have been so encouraged by with the torsion, who work from the Russians, because they did experiments with torsion. Uh, for example, you're familiar with the one where they have a telescope with a torsion detector on the back of it, and it's measuring the energy of the sun. Okay, the sun is passing overhead, and so there's some time involved, and they put filters on the telescope so it allowed no conventional form of energy to come through. They had like metal plates and all kinds of things to stop anything known from getting through. And it registered 3 images of the sun. An image is instantaneous, an image is at 8.3 minutes behind, which is the actual one we see in the sky, and one 8.3 minutes ahead, an advanced version. And that tells you that torsion actually has components that are traveling backwards in time as well as energy traveling forwards in time. So it has these 2 different aspects to it. And that, I think, to me, that is similar to a lot of paranormal phenomena that I may help explain someday this whole issue. But anyway, it's not part of conventional physics.
Does torsion in any way imply an access to a unified field theory that could unify quantums and the big world physics?
I think it should be part of it. I think that it needs to be part of any eventual unified field theory. I mean, it's a real force. It's a real phenomena. So, any Western scientist who's not taking that into account, to me, it's hopeless. He's not going to ever get there. And also with consciousness, it's so fundamental to consciousness that what the Russians have found is that the torsion field is what consciousness creates, and then you can you can create psychic phenomena with consciousness, so that it is the missing force.
The studies that I've read of psi phenomena, like changing how much oxygen yeast yields, it all has to do with intention. And so I guess intention is focused thought. So focused thought acts on the torsion field, which acts on consciousness.
Yeah, I would say focused thought is a torsion field. The thought itself is a torsion energy.
Because like you can measure alpha, beta, theta waves. Is that what you mean?
Well, that's electromagnetic, and those are in the brain. Those are electromagnetic. But around the body, because we're conscious, because we're thinking, there's also torsion. That there's a torsion field. That's what the aura, in my book, that's what I conclude. The aura is made of torsion. That's why our Western scientists can't measure the aura. They don't know how, because it's not electromagnetism, it's torsion. But it's being created by all the synapses and the nerves. It's being created in the brain. And it's part of the biophoton field. We have a biophoton field in the body, as you know, that is responsible for our growth and how our body repairs and how it carries on its functions. But every little biophoton is also creating torsion. That the one thing that comes out of the Russian work is that electromagnetism also generates torsion. And our body tries to keep its electromagnetic energy from the biophotons inside the body, because it's using that to communicate from cell to cell and things like that. It needs that for metabolism. but so you don't want to be radiating away all of your biophotons or you die. But the torsion field does get out, and that's the aura. And so you can, it carries a lot of the same information as the biophoton field does. So if you operate on the torsion field, you can generate health changes. The pattern, for example, of your liver, just as an example, will have a torsion field that is corresponding to that. If a healer works on that torsion field, he can affect how your liver is functioning. So
they have photographs of auras, so that must be electromagnetic, right? If you can photograph it, like Carillion photography.
yeah, not really. Here's what they have. They make a spark. A Carillion photograph is made from a spark. Okay, you create a high voltage pulse. Okay, and you create a little spark, and that makes the light that you creates the image. And that part is electromagnetic. But what makes one part of your skin produce a different spark than another part of your body? Why are some locations on the skin creating brighter spots than others? Okay,
Or colors, different colors.
different colors, right? And part of it is conductivity. You're right that there's the meridian system of the body does have conductivity, and that's different in different places. But there's more to it than that. It turns out that if you want to make a spark, if you're just trying to make a plain old spark with some metal plates and high voltage, at some threshold of voltage, you'll get a spark. But you can change the threshold with torsion. That the more left-handed torsion is present, the easier it is to make a spark, and the spark will be bigger. If you make enough right-handed torsion, you can stop the spark from occurring.
Wow.
Okay, so that the Carillion photography is really mapping the torsion field around the skin, and it's not talked about except in my book that I'm aware of. But there's plenty of evidence that it's true.
Chakra spin. So
Yeah.
how does that apply to the torsion phenomena?
Well, it's definitely relevant. It indicates the kind of torsion that's coming through. It does. And that's probably why when they're taking in energy, it's going to the right, more or less. Although I really, in that part of that book, I interviewed a lot of healers, and a lot of them just don't know. Okay, and I got different answers from different people. So, but it appears as though a healthy person, most of their chakras spin to the right.
Clockwise.
Yeah, clockwise, right. Yeah.
When I read someone's chakras, I kind of read them as the unconscious mind, and I read what's going on with them psychologically.
Okay. Interesting.
Just what I'm tuned in to do.
Yeah. Interesting.
Let's see. Let's talk more specifically about your books and what the main points. In the Synchronized Universe, New Science of the Paranormal, published in 2003, you gave a lot of evidence. I remember being really influenced by that book and quoting it in my Essential Energy Tools book because you gave so much good evidence for psi phenomena. What was the main point of that book?
That there are psi phenomena. That there are a bunch of phenomena that don't obey our present physics, and they tell us that our physics is broken. That's the biggest point, and there are so many skeptics, as you know, who take our standard physics as it's taught in school and say that's the end, and it doesn't explain any of these things, so they can't exist. And the fact is, they do exist. So that was really the main point. And I realized in the process of writing that book, this whole synchronized energy universe model kind of came up in a natural way to explain how when you're out of body, you go through walls and chambers, and how healers often are able to reach their hands into a person and work on their organs, things like that.
Like Barbara Brennan.
Exactly, exactly. Um, so and there are also a lot of teleportation experiments. The Chinese, their EHF program, where they select these adept little kids, 12 years old, who can put the beans inside the bottle, tape the bottle up, put the bottle inside a box, tape the box up, and then they can make the bean come out of the hand, just like
with
that.
their intention.
Yeah, that's right. So they can teleport by intention. So that tells you the matter is not what we thought it is, and that there are physics laws about exclusion principles and things like that keep things from doing that. So it tells us we can turn those off. So anyway, that was really just my first point, I guess, with the book, was just to show that these phenomena exist.
In the Life Force, your second book, did you know about torsion at that point?
Not at the beginning. I all of the books really came out of when I first began investigating the things that did not fit our current physics back in the late 80s. I began collecting evidence, as much as I could, and just rapidly, a very, very intense research program. And by about 1999 or so, I visited a friend of mine who's quite psychic, who I'd met in the remote viewing program, and I showed him what I had. And what I had were like 49 chapters on a different subject, okay? And I was thinking of making 3 books out of them. And he said, "Claude, that's intimidating."
You think?
And he suggested, why don't you take, a portion that would be the ones that would be the easiest to digest, maybe the least controversial, easiest to write, and make a first book out of that, and then get started that way. And that was the first book. So that was very good advice. And so these were all phenomena that had good evidence, and then after that book was out, then I moved to Colorado at that point, and discovered a community of people who are involved in energy healing and energy medicine. This is the ICEM group, and the subtle energy. Okay, and it was like I discovered my long lost home. Okay, all of a sudden I had a community, wonderful people, and I think their encouragement, they actually wanted to hear about this stuff, which was great, because before then I was in a vacuum pretty much. And so with their encouragement, I guess, I took on the next challenge. Okay, well, how do we explain this stuff? What's missing? And I think one way of saying what's missing is it's subtle energy. There's an extra energy that's not in our physics, that's involved in healing, involved in psychic phenomena, and let me try to, understand what it is. And I thought at first it would be pretty easy. I seem to always think that it's going to be kind of easy when I start. And I discovered von Reichenbach, and of course, and Wilhelm Reich, and I'm putting all this stuff together. And at some point I came across the Russians, okay? And I was already into the book, into the writing pretty deeply, when I discovered all the Russian work. And it's, oh my God, this is the answer. And it's so scientific. There's so much detail here. First of all, it was hard to get access to all the papers. A lot of them had not been translated. So you had to work with the ones that had been. It was clear that a lot of them had not been released. They were referenced in obscure Russian preprints that you could not find. I mean, I couldn't find. So I had to work with what I could find. But still, it was so rich. And so that shifted the direction of the whole book. That's when I discovered torsion. And I guess I had a little bit of I guess I had a little bit of money from my father because he'd given each of his kids a little bit of inheritance, kind of a pre-inheritance, and so I was able to travel a little bit, and I'd been to the crop circles in England,
Oh, wow.
and I discovered that they're about subtle energy, you know. And I'd been to the pyramids in Egypt, and I discovered the intense subtle energy feelings there, and so I'd begun realizing the dimensions of this whole subject. That first of all, civilizations have known about it for thousands of years. The Chinese, with their dragon lines and their temples and everything, they've been using this stuff. So the ley lines in England, the same thing. And so it's such a big subject, and so many cultures have known about it. So that caused me to add chapters to the book to talk about those things. So anyway, it's very, very satisfying, and it took 8 or 10 years to write it, much more than I thought.
Well, you said they usually take you about 7 years, huh?
Yeah, well, that's what on the average that's what it's been. I know one person asked me at some point where I was in the book, how much longer, and I said about 6 months. He said, Claude, I asked you 2 years ago, and you said 6 months.
So it's fair in summary to say that chi, ki, prana, mana boils down to torsion, to spin.
Right. Yeah. That is the life force energy, and it is fair to say, and it is such an important part of healing and of life. We probably wouldn't have life without it. Um,
I
the
wonder,
other,
the Sufi dancers who spin, I wonder if they're kind of tuning into it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Nikolai Kozyrev, who discovered it in Russia, um, talks about how living systems have a spiral to them. They even though we may look symmetric, but our alimentary system, our organs, are not arranged in a symmetrical way in our body.
Mm.
It appears that they're taking advantage of the torsion to extract more life energy. There's life energy present in the universe. Okay, it's everywhere really. That's part of this free energy or 0 point energy. And so living systems, it appears, have evolved to be able to derive it and pull it in. So I mean, there are qigong masters who don't require food. Okay, it's called bigu. It's what oftentimes happens as you become very adept with qigong. You don't need to eat anymore.
Same with some Hindu
Exactly,
adepts.
exactly. So that tells us that there's some other source of energy that's available besides the chemical energy of food, and again, it appears to be torsion.
So I'm thinking of like the spiral of a nautilus shell and the spiral of the galaxy. So all those spirals are indicative of their modeling on the torsion.
It could be. I don't want to overgeneralize too much, but it could be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you find that its effects are in many places that you wouldn't expect. The Russians, under Kozyrev, for example, and people who worked with him, point out that there's a reason why most of the continents are in the northern hemisphere. That there's a torsion effect because the Earth is a spinning object, and it causes them to be more in the northern part
Oh, wow.
of the globe than the southern part. Um, they also say that if you are at the North Pole, you look down at the Earth from your position, it's spinning to the left. That means more left-handed torsion. They found that makes you more psychic. In the southern hemisphere, in the Antarctica, it's spinning to the right from your perspective, and that actually works against it. So
Mm.
they've done experiments with torsion, and they find that you get better effects the further north you go.
Hmm.
So,
What about the pole? I read somewhere that the North Pole, I guess it is migrating.
mhm.
How does
Yeah,
that fit in with anything?
I don't know. I mean, the magnetic pole is certainly shifting. The spin axis may well shift one of these days. If it does, it may be very sudden. But the magnetic pole has been definitely shifting and speeding up. In my latest book, I talk about that. I have a whole section because it's coupled to this consciousness shift. They're all probably connected. Um, that my theory, which I describe in the third book, is that we're moving into a region of space where there's more left-handed torsion. That this is my hypothesis for trying to explain why. What I found is there's so many clairvoyants, so many people who travel out of body, so many near-death experiencers who talk about this shift. They all say it's happening. And I could be skeptical if only one or two said it, but I'm seeing so many different people say it.
Well, what's the nature of the shift?
Well, they're saying it's a consciousness shift.
How so?
But it's going to shift what they say is it'll shift our dimension. It'll shift the way we perceive reality. That from this synchronized universe model I described earlier, it'll definitely shift how we perceive reality. How it'll make us more psychic. It'll have a number of consequences.
And that's because of where we're moving in the solar system physically?
Well, that's the question. See, that's the question. If it's true, then how can I explain it? Okay. And my proposal is that it's the left-handed torsion. That left-handed torsion is, as astronomers would say, dark matter. It's a region of space that has more gravity. In fact, it has enough gravity that kind of clusters together, it clumps together. So a region of space with extra left-handed torsion will have increased gravity and some different physical properties, and it'll tend to hold together. So as the Earth moves around in space, we can move through regions that would be like that. And it'll change physical phenomena. There are certain physical constants of nature that we believe are fixed, but they're actually affected by torsion. That's why in the aura, when you apply a high voltage, why you get sparks that are bigger with stronger left-handed torsion. It's the breakdown voltage is being affected by torsion. There are other phenomena that are also affected by torsion. One example of that is ESP or ESP or intuition. There are two experimenters named Davis and Rawls who were kind of the Western pioneers in magnetic healing. They used magnets to heal people. And they claim that the south end of a magnet, which is actually the source of left-handed torsion, you put that to your third eye, it enhances your ESP. Okay, and they claim, and I've never seen any formal experiments they published, but in their books they definitely claim that. Okay, there is a region of space called the Great Attractor in Virgo. Okay, it's a certain part of the sky that has extra gravity there, and astronomers don't quite understand why. But a fellow named Spottiswoode was doing statistical studies to find out when our ESP is best, if it is affected by various things like time of day. And it's not affected by time of day, but it's affected by what stars are overhead. That when the Great Attractor in Virgo is overhead, we have about 3 or 4 times more ESP reception, better reception. And it shows up statistically in his data. So that was in my first book, and it's in my last book. But it's a fascinating result, and that would be a region when left-handed torsion was greater. So there's this connection between left-handed torsion and intuition. So that might be a possible explanation for why there might be a consciousness shift if we were to pass through a region where our intuition was enhanced. So that's a theory. So that's part of the third book.
So I'm not clear on the relationship of torsion to dark energy or dark matter. Are they all different things, or how do they connect?
Okay. Dark energy and dark matter are the names that our astronomers have given to regions of space that are anomalous. If a region of space has more gravity than it should, based on how many stars you can count there and how much matter you think it has, if it's got too much gravity, then they say that's dark matter. Dark matter is a fudge. It's a fudge factor. They don't admit that exactly, but it's a egregious fudge. It's like, okay, you take what we can understand, and then what's missing, and we just whatever that is, it must be dark matter. So it means too much gravity. Likewise, there are regions of space that are expanding faster than they should, based on our conventional theory. They say, well, that's dark energy. Dark energy is repulsive. It's anti-gravity. So that's what they say. And they only can measure it by when the model doesn't fit, then that's how they measure it. It's just it's fudge. But it just so happens that the Russian torsion models for right and left-handed torsion do predict that there will be regions of space with left-handed torsion in excess of it, and that'll be extra gravity. And regions of right-handed torsion will be anti-gravity or repulsion. So,
Oh, I get it.
so
So
the two
we don't need dark energy or dark matter at all.
exactly.
Wow, that's interesting. You talk about the physics of the soul and the afterlife in your third volume, and
Right.
is that more than consciousness and torsion that explains why the soul continues, or what's the physics of the afterlife?
Well, what I propose is that it means that when the physical body dies, that 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 our consciousness is really held in a form probably of torsion, probably a torsion form that is like a knot. It probably has some structure to it that keeps it stable over because it never goes away. So it probably is a knot that has threads that tie it to the distant matter of the universe, so it can never become untied. So it's eternal and it's immortal.
Well, people
But
see ghosts like gray shapes or something.
right, it appears that but the soul is probably physically smaller. Okay, the dimensions of the soul are probably at least the part that people see as orbs when they leave the body and when someone dies. The orb is often only an inch or so in diameter, maybe a few inches, but it's
Oh,
relatively small. But they're able to project that there is a template that it carries for a physical body with it, and
like
that
DNA kind of a thing,
it's like a hologram that it can project.
hologram.
And so probably most when we see ghosts, it's because that orb is projecting that pattern. Also in the afterlife, when people die and report from the afterlife, they see other people and they have the same physical form that they knew them in life.
Only younger and more beautiful or something.
Exactly, exactly. Um, and so that whole but their body's buried someplace,
Yeah.
okay, or it's cremated. So that form is carried by the soul. So it's just part of the information package that the soul seems to carry with it. And also with spontaneous OBEs, out of body projections, and people sometimes go somewhere else suddenly, and people see a physical form that's there.
So are you implying that I've seen pictures of orbs and there's a lot of them? Does that mean that each one is a soul?
It could be. It could be. I mean, I talk in that book about. I mean, people always send me orb pictures. Okay, well, one of the problems is that you can get orbs as artifacts.
On
Okay,
the camera
okay,
problem.
right. Any kind of dust or droplet or anything, insect. If it's in the near field of the camera, it's out of focus. When the flash goes off, it makes it look like a blur, like a ball. So you have to be careful. Um, and one of the best ways of doing that is to have your flash somewhere else.
Mm.
Flash off to the side, a few feet away, then you can avoid that. I mean, most people don't do that. It's hard sometimes to be sure that it really was an orb. Um, in in my experiments, I've done experiments in a graveyard, for example, with a strobe that was set up in the cemetery near the tombstone, flashing, and I was 30 feet away with a bunch of friends, and every so often we would see a sphere appear, you know, just for the moment of the flash occurred, and that is clearly by your binocular vision you can tell that's not something close; it's something far away. So you know how big it is. The first time I discovered real orbs, I was working with the UFO group back in Virginia, and they were coming back with orbs from doing photography at the uh, um, what's it, the which battle Bull Run battlefield, and one of them is more scientifically minded fellow, and he would take his camera down at his chest and take the picture, but with his eyes he could see the orb 6 feet away. You could tell how big it was. So you can do things like that and make sure that it's a real orb.
So they might still be hanging around their gravesite. They hadn't moved on, these orbs?
It could be. It could be. One of In one case I described in the book, um, I was with a well-known ghost hunter from Colorado named Christopher Moon, who grew up in a house uh, that he never called it haunted, but there was a lot of spirit activity there. It may be part of why he ended up doing that, as a avocation. Um, and so he and I went there with our night shot video cameras. Night shot is near infrared. It's a pretty good way to photograph orbs.
Oh.
And he said that typically every day there would be this crack, this noise that he wasn't sure if it was something he heard or something only on the recorder, but at which point orbs would begin pouring out of some spot in the space of the basement. They'd start coming out, hundreds of them. And then at a later time, they'd go back in. So they were like visiting our physical dimension from some other place. And he did a lot of observation with orbs. One of the things in my book is about electronic voice phenomena. That's recordings, voice recordings.
And on radios and
yeah.
Yeah.
And Christopher was doing that also. And with his night shot camera, he could see that the orbs would often go into the tape recorder. They go right through the little place where the recording heads are and out again. And that's when it seemed to be that they were leaving their voice message. So they were electromagnetically interfering with the tape and creating the vibration sound by doing that. But I got some great pictures there because Christopher, he was filming and he was seeing lots of orbs. I had my camera, and I don't have the reflexes he does, so he was saying, "Oh, there's one," and I wasn't saying anything. And I said, "Would you please ask him to slow down for me?" And so he said, "Would an orb please appear in front of Claude's camera and move slowly so he can photograph you?" And within about 2 seconds, one popped right in the middle and moved like that right along. I have 10 frames in sequence of it. So, they're conscious. They're beings. And I also have reports from people in the afterlife talking about what it was like going on a visit to the physical dimension from the astral. And they often say that they were like in a little bubble. They were looking out of a little bubble when they were visiting us. So we have descriptions from both sides of what orbs really are.
So are some orbs ETs, or orbs are generally spirits who've had a physical body?
It could be any of them. And anybody who can have an out-of-body experience can be an orb.
Because like the spirit goes out of, like when Robert Monroe went out of his body, he might appear to someone else as an orb.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though he was alive. His body was alive.
Keith Harari was a noted parapsychologist who did some experiments out of body. He went to visit his dentist or doctor, and in the out of body form, and what they saw was a little red orb zipping around in the office. So,
I said, hi. So what's your experience with UFOs and ETs? Do you think they visit us?
yeah, yeah, I think it's just part of it's all part of the same technology. I mean, once you admit that these technologies exist, then a lot of the observations become very familiar then because most people who have a lot, I'm not sure about most, but a lot of people who have abductions go out of body. They're taken out of body, they go out of body, and it seems to be a form that's very familiar and very easy to communicate between the ETs and people. That, um, so I know Ken Ring, who's a noted out of body afterlife researcher, has noticed the similarity between near death experiences and UFO abductions in terms of some of the changes that people make after having them.
Well, what I've read about UFO abductions is a lot of times the ETs work on the physical body. They kind of probe it and experiment and study it. So the body goes into the spaceship.
That's true. That's true too. That can happen too. It depends on how how many times they're abducted. but if you're watching over, if you're an ET and you're watching over some particular person for some reason, it makes sense to give them a checkup while you're there.
Every year.
Yeah, but there are also often out of body components to that. I know that with Betty Andreas and Luca, I mean that she described many experiences going out of body when her physical body would be lying on the couch, but she'd be off in the spaceship. And,
Oh.
so it can be either way.
But a lot of people think that some of the ETs, like the Greys, are without morality and not a good force.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just like people. There's all kinds of good and bad, but I think a lot of them are a lot of the little grays are probably robots. They're probably bred. They are being controlled by some of the other ETs, so they're doing some of the workmanlike stuff that has to be done with the visit. So that may be why they don't have much personality. Um, but it's also been proposed that they are related to us. That a lot of people who have abductions made agreements before being born to have these connections, that they may be connected to that particular race, and they've given permission to take part. They've forgotten it, of course, but I think it's complicated. But
What about, I've forgotten his name. He has a theory that some people ascribe to, that there's these negative reptilian forces who have done a lot of damage on Earth, and they work through politicians and something, these reptilian forces. Do you think there's any validity to that?
well, I've been watching some of the talks by Corey Goode, David Wilcox. Are those names you've
I think
watched?
Wilcox, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah. There seems to be evidence of that
Hmm.
as well. So again, it's complicated. I mean, it's complicated. If you go back to um, some of the most reliable pieces of evidence I've found, um, that the military, there were documents that were done up, even studies that were done even in the 50s. They recognized there were these different groups and they had different agendas. So some are much more positive and some are more negative. And it might be that the ones that we gave permission to back then were the more negative ones because they were willing to give us weapons
Technology.
Yeah, and the nicer ones we might have blown off because we didn't want to go with their agenda of,
Peace.
yeah, exactly. So we might be, this might be part of our karma. To, we may have, you know.
That's
So
interesting.
I don't know. I think it's complicated.
Uh-huh. Um, the Hindus have probably for 5,000 years talked about the Akashic records, and
Yeah,
that conveys the idea to me that there's an information field that we
right.
can read into. How does that relate to torsion field?
Yeah, I talk about that in my book, and I think again because in this torsion picture of the universe, every particle is zipping around and interacting with every other particle very rapidly, and so there are these energy connections back and forth. And so, even though we may think that space is empty, that actually we're all connected in a very intimate and complicated way. So it's more like a web, like the information web that it goes across the universe. I think a lot of that energy is torsion, and torsion can carry in energy or information instantaneously. So it means we're instantaneously in contact with everything else in the universe at that level, at the consciousness level. So when you meditate, or when you get a psychic message that is not limited by space and time the way we would think a light signal would be. Um, so to me, what happens is when you start looking at this network of interconnected torsion waves, and each one is coupled to other ones by nodes of intelligence, you have what's called a neural network computer. It's a computer that is capable of thought and is capable of knowing everything because it's tied into every event that happens in the universe, and it transmits information instantaneously. Okay, well that's kind of like God. There's like a universal intelligence that encompasses everything, and it's not like the old gods we had in our religions. It's not an old man with a beard sitting on a throne, but it really is the creator in a sense, and there can be intelligence there of a much higher level than we can even imagine, and it could take some fraction of the information that it has and manifest it into beings or other phenomena. So it kind of takes you to a higher level understanding of what maybe God is really like and why when it is possible when you pray to affect phenomena or events or health or the things like that, or even to change reality. One of the things I talk about in the book, in this last book, is the power of intention because we're learning how powerful intention is. And I start out with just some really familiar examples. Carnegie, the industrialist back in 1900, was one of the wealthiest people in the world, involved in the steel industry, the railroads, things like that. But he also wanted to share his knowledge so humanity could take advantage of how he was so successful. And so he hired this fellow, Napoleon Hill,
Oh, yeah.
to write up his principles for how he created and manifested things. And Napoleon Hill, in his research, was invited to interview Henry Ford, all the other Edison, and all the other top luminaries of that time. And so his book, Think and Grow Rich, which has been around, as a bestseller ever since then, incorporates these same principles that the mind is able to manifest things, to a much greater degree than we've ever been taught in school. And I think that's kind of what we're learning now. So.
But you said that on a subatomic level, thought is capable? Because thought sounds like.
Because thought is torsion. So by thought, we're shaping the torsion field.
So it's like the God thought or the original source thought, not the thought of the particle itself or whatever.
Well, that particle coupled with trillions and trillions of other particles. When they all interact with each other, then they become much more intelligent than just a single particle.
It's like a bee colony or an ant colony or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So so the yogis, like Yogananda, the reason it's called yoga, it means yoke.
Yoke.
It means joining yourself to God. And so you're coupling your consciousness, your mind, with this universal mind, and it makes you much more powerful, and you can know much more and affect much more. So
You say that consciousness is related to vibrations within a fluid-like etheric medium. So that something like breath, pranayama works. So the fluid-like etheric medium is created by the torsion field?
I don't think are those my exact words? I don't think those. Are you reading something I wrote?
Yeah, I think so.
Where are you reading this from?
I have no idea. I just
Doesn't sound like me. That the terminology doesn't sound like me. I mean, it's not far off, but it doesn't sound like what I would say either.
Okay, so you don't think there's a fluid-like etheric medium?
Well, the word etheric I have trouble with because etheric is misused and used so many different ways. You can call it a torsion field. I would call it a torsion field.
Okay. What's book number 4 going to be?
I'll let you know in a year.
Or 10 or 7. What are you interested in now? What are you researching?
Well, I'd like to bring some more detail to our understanding of torsion. I think we have some idea about how it may connect to the afterlife and to healing. I'd like to know more about the science of it, if it's possible, to see how much we can squeeze out to know what that looks like. So it might not be a broad interest, but it's for my own interest. I'd like to know more about it.
Is it known mathematically as well? I mean, do you start with the math and then try to apply it to experiments?
Well, I think here's the thing: that the Russian published papers by Shipov, for example, which is the best source I have, it's from the point of view of something like Einstein's theory of relativity, but then extended beyond that, adding torsion to it. So he has like twice as many equations, and it's a more complicated theory, but it's still the basic framework. Suppose there are other things he should have looked at, maybe other alternative extensions that he didn't look at. I mean, some people would like David Wilcox, but based on other physicists who have been proposing this, say maybe time has 3 dimensions. Maybe, okay, it's not just space, but also time has 3 dimensions. So that you have a bigger field, a bigger, more complicated space. Now, it was already complicated enough, but it might be that the true reality is more complicated. So there are things that I would like to see how they fit in, if they do.
In the face of global warming, growing inequality, more autocrats in the model of Trump, are you optimistic or pessimistic about our future as humans on this planet?
Well, I think this shift that we're going through is something real. I think the movements of the polls are evidence of that it's speeding up, that all the clairvoyants are saying it. In my introduction to this 3rd book, I have a lot of information about that, about the evidence for the shift. And that means that we're going to see a ramping up of humanity over the next few years. Now, it might be traumatic. It might be that there'll be some earth changes or other things that may be, but we may also have help. I mean, this is what I found remarkable. You haven't seen the book probably, but and my website has not been put on there either. But there's lots of evidence that we have help. That they're messing with our sun. Our sun itself is being affected by this left-handed torsion, in my view.
Deliberately.
Well, No, I think this is. I think the left-handed torsion cloud is there, and we're moving into it, and it's affecting the planets and the sun. Okay, and that's a physical phenomenon. But you also, if you look in the data, you find evidence of other strange things going on. There are SOHO photographs. It's a NASA SOHO photographs um, showing objects, large objects, around the sun that may be affecting it. And I tend to think they're probably beneficial. That's my assumption. Anyway, I didn't mean to get off on that, but anyway, these are
It's
all.
fascinating. This is all fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're implying that you're optimistic, but it could be chaotic to get to.
Yeah, that's right. Optimistic but chaotic. There you go.
That there's talk about the Aquarian age, the Golden Age, coming out of the Kali Yuga, to mix up my images. So,
Well,
and they all say that there's going to be a lot of upheaval before it settles down.
that could well be. Yeah.
We'll see. As I'm winding up here, as a person who does all this research and writing and thinking, what do you do for fun? I know it's fun for you, but what else do you do for fun?
Yeah. This is it. This is as good as it gets.
What about fun for the body, not just the mind?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I haven't done a very good job in that area.
A lot of people have said nature really fulfills them and makes them feel better. Taking a walk in nature.
Yeah, that's probably a very enlightened thing to say. And I probably should do more of that.
One of the things I'm asking people, I want to make sure I ask you, is their birth order.
Oldest,
Of how many?
5.
Because someone told me that there's a book called Rebel Scientists, and he said that he found they tended to be later born because that inspires people to be more rebellious. But I haven't really found that.
Well, I don't feel like a rebel. I don't consider myself a rebel.
And other people don't react to you like a rebel.
No, I looked at people who are compatible with me. I talk to people who are congenial. I don't.
And that you did 20 years as an applied physicist, and they probably didn't pay attention to what you were doing on the side.
It's like growing up in a small town. When you decide that you're an atheist, you don't go around telling everybody.
That's that's a good image. Anything that we've left out that you think, oh, this is really a significant point we should include?
I just say that that the shift that we're going through is a consciousness shift. It's huge. We are going to learn a lot of the things that we never dreamed of before. That what was science fiction 50 years ago or even 20 years ago is going to become suddenly very real. And a lot of these revelations about the secret space program, for example, that you mentioned, David Wilcox, I find them very credible. And the more you look into it, the more evidence you find. So people have to be prepared for changing their points of view. The same with global warming. I found that I did some research on global warming, which I know is we're getting from all sides now in the public media. But really, I've been shocked to find that the evidence is not there. The evidence is there's a politicization that has happened with global warming that has caused very selective use of data. It's kind of like string theory. I mean, it's like that some of these things, if certain groups find an advantage to promoting a certain point of view, then, for example, a climate scientist who wants funding, especially during the Obama administration, he better be working on global warming. if he has the opposite point of view, he's out of luck. So that these government funding sources that should be objective are often not. They're often highly political. So you have to kind of go back and be very objective and take a look at things. And I mean, for example, well, I don't know. You probably don't want to hear about all this stuff, but I mean, it's. I mean, I was a complete believer in Al Gore and his speech when he made it. Okay, that was a very well done speech.
Yeah.
But one of the principal pieces of evidence are the core samples in Antarctica showing the temperature changes over the millennia and the CO2 changes. That was one of the strongest pieces of evidence he had. Well, if you go back and look at it, you find, and they know very well, very accurately now, that there was a time offset between those two curves, the CO2 and the temperature. 800 years lag, that the CO2 rose 800 years after the temperature changed. Okay, so that what that's telling you is that the water in the oceans and also the ice trap CO2. When it warms up, it releases CO2.
Mm-hmm.
So these changes are really an effect, not a cause. So I mean, that's just one kind of glaring fact that ought to get more publicity.
Interesting.
You know.